Hello, with all the introductory things out of the way, we're now ready to actually build the building blocks for our first programming language. In today's lesson, we're going to go over variables. One thing I do want to mention right from the get-go is don't worry about memorizing the names of the concepts too much. Those things will come to you in due time. You want to mainly focus on understanding the concept behind each of them, and learning why and how to use it. The actual names and everything else will kind of stick in your head in due time. So we're going to get into variables by going over some examples that we actually use in our day-to-day life. One thing to pay attention to when learning programming is that most of it is built off the brain. So all the inspiration for a lot of the things that you'll see in programming is actually from the human brain, from things that we think we understand about the brain at least. So it's good to think about it that way. Things will make a lot more sense. So let's say we got our paycheck, and obviously the first thing that comes to our mind is actually to go to Target, and spend that money because obviously that's the right thing to do. So one of the things that we usually end up doing is we have a bunch of money and we go into Target. We have in our head that, okay, um, I can only spend, I only have $100 to spend. So as you're shopping, you always have this number in your head because you can't go over it because then the cashier is not gonna let you go through. So that's a number that you have in your head. That's the amount of money that you got after a hard day's work. So you keep that in mind as you continue to shop. Now, every time you actually go up to buy the things that you hopefully need, you actually have this number in mind. So let's say you go and you grab some eggs, and you keep in mind that, okay, this was $3, and then you go and, for example, pick up a pair of pants along the way, and that ends up being $30.50. So in your head, you are keeping track of whatever you're buying and the prices on them because you don't want to exceed this $100 as you're shopping. And I'm sure that everyone has actually experienced this. And then as you continue to shop, you keep track. So over here, up to now, we have spent 33.50, but obviously we can shop more because we have more money to spare. So we can pick up a shirt, let's say for $10, and now this ends up becoming 44.50. Now, along the way, you remember that you needed to buy 3 sodas because you have guests coming over. So this is something again that you kept in your head, and you remember. And I want to point this out as well. So we have these prices, and then you have this, which you just remembered as you were shopping that you need 3 sodas as well. So this is again something that you were thinking about, and so you end up going to buying those sodas, and let's say they were 250 each. So it would be 750, and then our sum would end up being $52. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is everything that you actually do when you go to buy anything at Target, and all of these that we're talking about in programming, we call them variables because there are things that we need to keep track of as we're doing our activities or anything like that. There is things that we need to remember, things that we need to keep track of. That's why we need variables, and the reason it's called variable is because if you see here, for example, the total that we have spent, it keeps changing, right? The number keeps changing based on what we buy or what we put back. And this number that we have at the top, the amount we have to spend, you know, on Monday it may be $100, but maybe when we come on Friday we won the lottery, and we have $1,200 to spend. But keep in mind there are variables that could also be constant; they don't change that much either. So I hope this gave you an idea of why we need variables. So over here we can say, okay, total spend, total to spend, we can call it, is $100. Total actually spent is 52, and these are all variables. So we have it in our head that we have something, maybe you'll remember it as something else, salary, total to spend, the name can be whatever, but we have somewhere in our head where we're storing these numbers. We're keeping track of how much we spent. We have number of sodas we need to buy. Is 3, and this is all in our brain and we're thinking about it. In a computer program, it's the same exact thing. We need somewhere to store these numbers, or we need to store other things that we need to keep track of. Another example is, as you're buying this stuff in Target, you'll see that, you know, if you're a member, for example, you get a specific sale, like it's a bit cheaper if you're a member. So in your head, you have that, okay, I'm a member. And you shop based on this, that you know you're a member. So this is something else that you're keeping track of. And this is not a number or anything like that. This is just, you're either a member or you're not a member. Okay, so in your case, in your head, you're saying, yes, I'm a member. Right? And you're making your shopping decisions based on that. And these are all examples of different kind of variables that you actually use in real life. Now that we understand the variables and why they're useful, let's actually get into some programming concepts and show these same exact things with Java, which is the language we're going to be using, right? So just as I showed you, there are different kinds of variables, right? So in the example that we showed, we had the prices, which were using decimal numbers, right? Because we know in our head that the price of anything could be, because they have cents, right? So it could be $12.50, $9.99, and stuff like that. We can never think of the price of something being $9.99.99, right? It's always going to be only 2 decimal places. Or for example, when we're thinking of number of sodas, it can only be whole numbers, right? You cannot buy 2.5 sodas. It makes absolutely no sense. And that's why we have types. We have many types of variables, but I'm going to introduce a few of them, but we'll learn more as we go along. So when we want whole numbers, we use int, which is short for integer. When we want decimal numbers, we use float. When we want something which is either true or false, we use Boolean. And the last one I want to show you is when we want to actually use words. So for example, if you wanted to store your name, you would use letters, right? So a bunch of letters, not actual numbers. And for that, we use string. Okay, so this is something, it's good to just look at this, kind of learn the language of it. Again, you don't need to immediately memorize it, but understand what each of them do. Now let's go over how you actually make a variable. So the way you would do it is you can say, first you you write what the type is. So let's say int, and we're going to call it number of sodas. We need to give it a name. And then we can say it equals to 3, and we end with a semicolon. So semicolon is kind of like a period in when we write a sentence in English. It indicates end of sentence, end of statement. Int is the type. This is the name of your variable, and it can be whatever you want. And this is the value you assign to it. And this is really how you actually make variables in Java. So now let's do the same exact thing for the amount that we have to spend. So this one, since we know it's not going to be an int, right? Because the amount we're going to spend is in dollars, so it's going to be a decimal number. So we're going to say float amount, and it's good to give your variables names that make sense so you don't confuse yourself. So I'm going to say amount to spend, and in our case it's going to be 100. And for the last one, if we are a member or not, we're gonna use a boolean because we're either a member or we're not. So boolean is target member now you can put true or false. I'm gonna put false so you can see this one as well. And the last one I want to show you is I want to actually save our name as well. Well, because you always remember your name, right? So string name equals, and in order to write actual letters, you have to put these quotations. There you have it, the 4 variables that we just talked about in the just earlier. We now learned how to actually write them in code. So again, you write the type first, the name of the variable that you want, and then you can assign it a value. This part here is called declaring a variable because you're telling the computer that I want a variable which is an int, and this is the name, and this part here is where you're assigning the value. Now if someone, let's say your partner texts you at some point and says, no, we don't actually need 3 sodas, we need 1 soda. So since we already declared that we have a variable called number of sodas, we can just say, okay, now we need to change the number of sodas from 3 to 2. Just like that. I wanted to show you another example of variables, and I told you that I want to show you with games as well, so you get some visual representations of what we actually see in games of variables. So over here, this is League of Legends, one of the most popular games of all time, and I want to show you how much variables are used. So over here, before I do it, if you want to take a go at this and try to identify the different variables, be my guest. It's a really good practice, but this is the first time. I just want to show you. So over here, you can see we have how much health we have right here, right? 600 out of 600, and you can also see it on the top right here. So that's a variable, right? That's a variable that keeps track of our health. So we have our total health, which is 600, and the current health, which is also 600. So from what we see here, this can either be a float, right? It can either be a decimal number, because you can see over here that it gets plus 0.8 when we're not at full HP, which we'll showcase in a second. And then we have at the bottom here, we have the amount of mana that we have, which is also a variable because it keeps track. So if I use an ability, you'll see that my mana goes down and then it starts going back up. So there's a variable keeping track of it. And you can see here that it's whole numbers. We have our maximum mana, and then we have our current mana. So some other examples. Now, if you want to take a go at it before I explain it, you can pause and go for it. But over here, you can see my name for my account. So that's a variable, and it's a string because it's words, right? Reporter. And then you can see in the bottom here, we have the amount of gold that I have. And this is also a variable because it's keeping track, just like the total amount spent that we talked about with the target example. And we can see this is also an integer because it's increasing by whole numbers as well. And the amount is limitless, right? So if you look at the top here, the amount of kills that we have is also an integer. The time at the top right is also a variable. The frames that we have is a variable. The amount of latency that we have is also a variable. So all of these different things, and if you look at the bottom left here, my level, I'm level 1. Guess what? It's a variable. It's an integer. I don't know how many times I've repeated the words variable, but I think you all get the point. We have, the amount of attack damage. Everything that you see here is a variable. This is a float. This is an int. This is an int, and so on and so forth. Now, to end off this lecture, we're going to do one exercise. So let's say we want to open a checking account at a bank. So I'm going to tell you what to do first. Identify all the different variables that you're going to need. You don't need to do like 10 or 20. Maybe you can do 5. Identify 5 variables that would be useful to keep track of whenever you're creating a checking account. And then also identify the types you would need for them and give them a good name. And then you can pause the video right now, take a crack at it, see if you can do it. And then once you're done, you can unpause that and I'll give you the answer. So go ahead and pause. Okay, so hopefully you've been able to do some damage and identify some variables. So the first thing that comes to my mind is we need a name for the account. So I'm just going to say string. And again, it's really good practice from the get-go to give good names to your variables. Okay, so we're going to say account name. We're going to talk about how to put the names together, why I use a capital for the N and no spaces. But for now, let's just stick to understanding the concept. So the second thing I can think of is maybe we put a limit on the amount of money that they can put in. So we can say float, since it's a decimal number, max amount ceiling. The third one I can think of is the balance. Which is also a float. And then we want to see if they have overdraft protection. So we can say Boolean. Call it is overdraft protected. Because you either have the protection or you don't have it. And let's see, what can be the last one? We can have an integer number of people on account. So this is 5 examples of variables that you would need. Maybe you came up with different ones. That's completely fine, but as long as you came up with some variables, put some types before them, and then actually put good names, make sure that when you actually have names for your variables, you don't have spaces in between them. And we'll go over the why we do that later, but then also end with the semicolon. Okay, with that, that would be the end of this lesson. If you do have any questions, please let me know in the comments. If it's not complex to answer, I'll just answer it right there. But if it needs more explanation, I'll just probably do a video on it. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.